His blood splattered on my face as my father finally managed to control him. But it was too late for my mother, too late for all of us. Good morning, my dears. My name is Jaint, but everyone calls me Vita around here. I am 73 years old and was born in Pelotas, in Rio Grande do Sul, but I have lived in Curitiba for over 50 years. Today I'm going to tell you a story that I've kept inside me for almost 60 years. A story that many in my family don't even know very well, because the pain was so great that the words refused to come out of my mouth. If you are watching this video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This old lady here thanks you from the bottom of her heart. Tell me in the comments which part of Brazil you see me from. Sometimes I wonder how my words reach places I've never been in my life. And that warms my heart in a way I can't even explain. I also want to ask you to comment on how many beloved sons and daughters you have. I would be very grateful to know. Let's start at the beginning. When I was just 14 years old, in 1965. We were a simple but happy family. My father, Valdir, was a military police officer, a man as straight as a sword, the kind who wouldn't accept any free coffee on the job. Do you know? Police officers have to be examples, net. He always said, adjusting that impeccable uniform before leaving. My mother, Marilene, was a primary school teacher, a strong woman who woke up at 5 in the morning to have his coffee ready, his lunch box prepared, and still arrived punctually at the school where she taught the children. Our house was modest in the Portao neighborhood, which at that time was almost a rural area of Curitiba. We had a large backyard with bergamot, guava, and lemon trees that my father looked after as if it were his own son. Oh, and speaking of children, it was just me, an only child for a long time. Mom and Dad tried to have more children, but after 3 miscarriages, the doctors said it was risky for my mom's health to try again. I grew up being the center of their attention, but without being spoiled. With privilege comes responsibility. Mom always said this when I complained about having to help with the housework. I studied at the same school where my mother taught, which was terrifying for a teenager. Just imagine. I couldn't do anything wrong without her finding out. Our weekends were simple. On Saturdays we went to the municipal market to buy things for the week. Afterwards we would stop by my paternal grandmother's house, who lived in the center. On Sundays, after Mass, it was pasta day and time to receive my father's friends, almost all of whom were also police officers, with their families. It was an ordinary life, without luxuries, but full of security and love. Everything changed that winter of 1965. I remember it as if it were today, the cutting wind of Julio in Curitiba, that cold that penetrates to the bones. My father arrived home later than usual, with a different expression. It wasn't tiredness, it was emotion. He, who had always been a man of few words, didn't stop talking that night during dinner. Marilene neat, today I met a boy who broke my heart. He started stirring the bean and vegetable soup that Mom had prepared. It was an incident in Vila das Torres. His mother, a drug user, was arrested for trafficking. Nobody knows who the father is. The boy was there, thin, scared, with nowhere to go. Mom listened attentively, as she always did. She deeply respected my father's work, even with all the danger involved. He's 16 years old, Marilene. His name is Bernardo, a polite young man. Despite everything he's been through, he could be involved in crime like so many others in that place, but he studies, has a tidy notebook, and good grades. It was then that I saw something in my father's eyes that I had never seen before. A different determination, almost a plea. He's going to a state shelter, but he knows what those places are like. There are barely enough resources for young children, let alone a teenager. My mother placed her hand over his, as if she already knew what was coming next, and came. I was thinking, Marilene, we have space, we have conditions. And always wanted a brother. I remember the silence that followed. A heavy silence, full of possibilities. Mom looked at my dad, then at me, then back at him. Valdir, are you talking about adoption? He nodded, those blue eyes shining in a way I rarely saw. He can stay in the back room, the one that belonged to his mother. He's almost a man now, he won't be a problem for a little kid. And believe me, this boy is special. I felt it. That night, the conversation went on until late. I sat there, kind of forgotten, at the table, while they discussed the pros and cons. My mother had her reservations. After all, Taking in an unknown teenager is not a decision that can be made overnight. But my father was determined in a way I had never seen. Marilyn, I can't explain. I looked at this boy and saw something. I saw it make a real difference in someone's life, giving a family to someone who never had one. My mother, who had a soft heart despite her tough teacher appearance, ended up giving in. Let's meet you first, Valder. Let's take it easy. The following week, my father got permission to bring Bernardo home for lunch. I remember peering out the window, curious to see what this possible new brother would look like. When my father's car parked, he got out first. Then a thin young man with well-cut brown hair, wearing a clean but visibly faded t-shirt and worn jeans. Bernardo entered our house as if he were entering a museum, looking at everything with reverence, almost afraid to touch anything. He had big brown eyes, a little sad, and a shy smile that appeared rarely. He spoke little, always very polite, calling my parents sir and madam and me girl. Can you call me Neat? I said, trying to break the ice. Everyone calls me that. He nodded, still not looking at me directly. Thanks Net. Lunch was a little uncomfortable at first. Bernardo ate slowly. Small portions, as if he was afraid that the food would run out or that someone would take his plate away. My mother, with her maternal instinct, soon noticed. There's plenty of food, son. You can have as many as you want, she said in that sweet voice she used with her shyer students. It was the first time I saw Bernardo really smile, a smile that completely transformed his face, which suddenly seemed much younger, almost childlike. You cook very well, Mrs. Marilyn, he said, finally allowing himself to look directly at my mother. I saw the look my parents shared at that moment. I know now, looking back, that was when the decision was really made. In the following weeks, Bernardo came more often. I stayed for dinner, helped my father water the plants in the backyard, asked about my studies. With each visit he seemed to loosen up a little more. He said that his biological mother would leave him alone for days, that he often had nothing to eat, and that he learned to fend for himself from a young age. He said his dream was to be a mechanic, that he liked to take things apart and put them back together to understand how they worked. Do you think I can really, Mr. Valder, be a mechanic one day? He asked once, with such genuine hope in his voice that even my adolescent skepticism moved me. Of course you can, boy, with dedication. You can be whatever you want to be. My father replied, placing his hand on Bernardo's shoulder. The boy stiffened for a second, as if he wasn't used to the touch, but soon relaxed. My mother was the last to be fully convinced. Not out of malice, but out of caution. She observed more than she spoke. I noticed how her eyes followed Bernardo when he didn't notice, how she asked seemingly casual questions to get to know him better. One night, when Bernardo had already left, I heard my parents talking in the kitchen. He's a good boy, Marilyn. He had a hard life, but he maintained his kindness. This is rare. I know, Valder. I'm just afraid we're not what he needs. Have you ever thought what would happen if we didn't manage? If he needs more help than we can offer, we'll take it one day at a time. But that boy needs a family and we can be that family. 3 months after that first lunch, in October 1965, Bernardo officially moved into our house. The bureaucracy was not as complicated as it could have been. My father knew people in the system, and Bernardo's biological mother signed all the custody relinquishment papers without hesitation, eager to be free of what she considered a burden. We set up the back room, the one that belonged to my grandmother before she passed away. We painted the walls light blue, put in a new bed, a desk for studying, a bookshelf for the few belongings he had. My mother bought him new clothes, school supplies, even a small radio that he could listen to in his free time. The day he arrived to stay for good, my mother made a chocolate cake with the phrase "Welcome to the Bernardo family" written in colorful sprinkles. He looked at it and, for the first time since we had known him, he cried. He didn't hide his face, nor did he try to disguise it. He just let the tears flow as he thanked her. Repeatedly. No one has ever done anything like this for me, he said between sobs. My mother hugged him and, for the first time, he hugged her back without hesitation. My father, who was not a man who showed emotions easily, discreetly wiped away a tear. The adjustment was not immediate or perfect. Of course. Bernardo had strange habits. Sometimes he would wake up screaming in the middle of the night because of nightmares. He would hide food in his room as if he was afraid that one day it would run out. He had difficulty accepting gifts or any form of kindness, without feeling that he needed to reciprocate immediately. But little by little the boy began to feel safer, more at home. We enrolled him in the same school where I studied and where my mother taught. At first, the other students would whisper and ask indiscreet questions about where he had come from, why he was living with us. Bernardo answered politely, but without giving many details. "I am Neat's brother now." That was all he would say, with a simplicity that disarmed even the most curious. At home, he made an effort to fit into our routine. He would wake up early, get ready. He meticulously made his bed and offered to help with all the chores. My mother had to insist that he rest too, so that he would understand that he didn't have to pay for being there. "Son, you don't have to do all this. This is your home now, not a place where you work in exchange for shelter," she explained patiently. "It's hard to get used to it, Mrs. Marilyn," he replied, lowering his eyes. "I've always had to do something in exchange for anything. Nothing was free." My father found a mechanic's shop near home where Bernardo could help on Saturday mornings. The owner, Mr. Antonio, was an old friend of my father and agreed to teach the boy the basics. Bernardo returned from those mornings with his hands covered in grease, but with a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes that was beautiful to see. "Mr. Antonio said I have a knack for things." He was excitedly talking during Saturday lunch. "Today I managed to disassemble and reassemble a carburetor by myself." On Sunday nights, when we would welcome my father's friends for the traditional pasta, Bernardo would initially be withdrawn, almost hidden. Over time, he began to participate more, even telling some stories that made everyone laugh. My father's colleagues treated him like part of the family, which clearly meant a lot to him. With me, the relationship took a little longer to develop. I, at 14 years old and with all the insecurity of adolescence, didn't really know how to act with this new brother who had appeared out of nowhere. Sometimes I would tease him, test his limits, and see how far his patience would go. Bernardo never fought back. He just smiled that sad smile and said, "It's okay, Neat, it's okay." It was on a rainy afternoon, one of those typical in Curitiba, that our relationship began to change. I had a math test the next day and was having trouble with equations. Frustrated, I threw my notebook away and started crying with rage. Bernardo, who was passing by in the hallway, stopped at the door of my room. "Can I help you?" "Math has always been my favorite subject," he offered shyly. Reluctantly, I let him sit next to me. To my surprise, Bernardo explained things much more clearly than the teacher. He was patient, used everyday examples, and didn't get angry when I didn't understand at first. "See? You can do it, Ned, it's just a matter of looking at the problem from another angle," he said with a kindness that completely disarmed me. After that day, I began to see Bernardo in a different light. He was no longer the intruder in my family, but someone who had his own value, his own qualities. I began to include him when I went out with my friends, to defend him when someone at school made mean comments, to truly treat him like a brother. 6 months after his arrival, the change in our home was evident. Bernardo smiled more, spoke louder, took up his space without apologizing for being there. My parents were thrilled with his progress, proud of how he was developing at school, in the workshop, at home. "Best decision we ever made," my father commented one night, watching through the window, as Bernardo helped my mother pick lemons from the tree. "That boy deserved a chance and look how he took advantage of it." If someone had asked me at that moment if I was happy with my new brother, I would have said yes, without hesitation. Bernardo seemed to be exactly the right person for him. That my family needed to be complete. A son for my parents, a brother for me, someone who brought a new and positive energy to our home. How could I have imagined that behind that shy smile, those sad eyes, that seemingly sincere gratitude, something much darker was hidden? How could I have known that that decision made with so much love by my father would end up destroying our family in a way that none of us could have foreseen? At that time, I only saw what I wanted. I didn't see the small signs, the strange behaviors that, looking back now, were like red flags, waving furiously, warning of a danger that we didn't know how to recognize in time. The first months with Bernardo were like a dream that would very soon turn into the worst nightmare of our lives. Have you ever noticed how we always ignore that little voice inside our heads that tells us that something is not right? That's how it was with me. The signs were all there, flashing like a broken traffic light, but I chose not to see them. Maybe out of naivety, maybe because I didn't want to disappoint my parents, maybe because I was afraid of being unfair to them. Someone who had suffered so much. It was in early 1966, about 3 months after Bernardo officially moved into our house, that I began to notice small changes. Nothing blatant at first, just oddities, details that seemed out of place, like a picture on the wall that someone had moved 1 centimeter. And only those who know the house well notice. The first thing I noticed was the way he looked at my mother when he thought no one was looking. It wasn't a look from a son to a mother, nor one of gratitude. It was something more possessive, as if he were planning something. When she passed him in the kitchen and touched his shoulder affectionately, something in his eyes would change for a second. A flash of something that at the time I couldn't identify. But today, looking back, I recognize it as pent-up anger. One morning, I woke up earlier than usual and went to the kitchen to get some water. I stopped at the door when I heard low voices, Bernardo and my mother. She was making coffee, as she always did, around 5 in the morning, and he had gotten up early to help. He didn't need to wake up so early. Early, son? My mother would say in that sweet voice of hers. I like to be alone with you. He answered in a tone that gave me the creeps. Mr. Valder and Neat don't understand you like I do. My mother laughed. That polite laugh she gave when she didn't know how to respond to something. What nonsense, Bernardo. We are a family. Before, I had nothing. He continued as if she hadn't said anything. Now I have you. That was the way he said it. No, now I have you or now I have a family, he was specific. Now I have you. As if my mother were something that belonged to him. When I entered the kitchen, Bernardo changed completely. He was back to being a polite and smiling boy, offering to pour me a glass of milk, asking if I had slept well. But I caught his gaze before the transformation, irritated that I had interrupted the moment. I told my best friend, Solange, about these little perceptions. Are you jealous, Neat? She said, laughing. Is it normal when a new sibling arrives? Maybe that was it, maybe it was just silly teenage jealousy. I decided to try to be better, to try harder to accept Bernardo completely, but strange things kept happening. My mother started to notice that some of her personal belongings were disappearing. A lipstick, a hat, an old photo where she appeared alone. Little things that could easily be explained as lost around the house. When she mentioned these juices at dinner, Bernardo was always the first to offer to help look for them, always the most worried. That's strange, Mrs. Marilene, he would say with apparent concern. Are you sure you didn't leave it at school? One afternoon I came home early from school because I had felt sick during gym class. No one expected me to arrive at that time. Mom was at school, Dad was at work, and Bernardo must have been at the workshop, since it was his learning day there. But when I entered the house, silently because of my headache, I heard noise in my parents' room. I thought they were burglars and I was paralyzed with fear. Then, very slowly, I peeked through the half-open door. It was Bernardo. He was lying down in my parents' bed, hugging my mother's pillow, with my face buried in it, breathing deeply, as if I wanted to absorb her scent. Beside him, scattered on the bed, were several objects that I recognized as the lost ones, the lipstick, some photos, even a hairbrush. I was there before he saw me, my heart beating so loudly that I thought he could hear it. I left the house without making a sound and went to Solange's house, pretending that I had gotten sick on the street, not at home. That night I couldn't sleep. I wanted to tell my parents, but what would I say? I caught Bernardo sniffing my mother's pillow. It sounded ridiculous even to me. What if it really was just jealousy, as Solange had suggested? What if I was seeing problems where there weren't any because I didn't want to share my parents? I decided to observe more before saying anything. I started paying attention to every detail of Bernardo's behavior, especially when he didn't know he was being watched. That's when I realized how much he changed, depending on who was around. With my father he was the perfect son, respectful, hardworking, interested in stories about police work. With my mother he was needy, almost childish at times, always seeking approval and physical affection, a touch on the arm, a hug, a cuddle. With me he alternated between being the protective older brother and long hours completely ignoring me, as if I were invisible. But there were moments, small moments when the mask slipped, like when my father corrected him in front of a neighbor about how to hold a tool. I saw his face contort into an expression of pure hatred before quickly smiling and thanking him for the correction. Or when my mother proudly mentioned that I had gotten the highest grade in the class in Portuguese. Bernardo broke the pencil he was holding in two, hiding the gesture under the table. Things started to disappear or break around the house. My father's old wristwatch, an inheritance from my grandfather, a set of dishes my mother had received at her wedding, my diary that I kept hidden under the mattress. When questioned about anything, Bernardo always had a perfect alibi. He was always somewhere else, he always had a reasonable explanation. One day I found my cat, Romeo, dead in the backyard. He was only 2 years old and healthy. I cried inconsolably as my father buried him under the guava tree. Bernardo was at my side, comforting me, saying that the cat had probably eaten something poisoned on the street. "Are these cats really like that, neat?" he said, putting his arm around my shoulders. "You never know where they're going, what they're eating. Don't get too attached to animals. They will always leave you." Something in his tone bothered me deeply. I looked into his eyes and for a moment I saw something cold, almost amused, as if he were enjoying my pain. I pushed the thought away. It would be too absurd. The situation with my mother gradually worsened. Bernardo began to create small conflicts between her and my father. He would tell slightly different stories to each of them about what the other had said or done. Nothing obvious or aggressive, just small distortions that over time created distrust. "Dona Marilene, Mr. Valder, commented at the cafe that you are very tired, that you should skip some classes. He thinks you can't handle it, or else, Mr. Valder," Dona Marilene said that she gets upset when you arrive late without warning. "She thinks you don't care about the family." My parents, who rarely argued before, began to have small disagreements. Nothing serious, but enough to create a tension that hadn't existed before. And Bernardo was always there, being the peacemaker, the understanding, the one who understood both sides. "Mrs. Marilene, you work too much. It's normal for Mr. Valder to worry." "Mr. Valder, Mrs. Marilene is only worried because she loves the Lord." He created the problem and then presented himself as the solution. It was like a macabre dance that only I seemed to see. In the midst of this whirlwind, something happened that made me even more alert. Clara, my 15-year-old cousin, who lived in Ponta Grossa, came to spend a week with us during the July holidays. She was beautiful, with blonde hair, green eyes, the kind of girl who makes boys turn their heads on the street. Bernardo was immediately fascinated by her. At first, I thought he was just a 17-year-old boy enchanted by a pretty girl. It was normal, right? But there was something more intense, more disturbing in the way he watched her, as if she were prey. Clara noticed and began to avoid being alone with him. When I asked what was going on, she hesitated, looking embarrassed. "Neat, your brother is kind of strange, isn't he? He follows me around the house, watching me when he thinks I'm not looking. Last night I woke up and he was standing at the door of the guest room, just watching me sleep. I felt butterflies in my stomach." "Did you tell Aunt Marilene or Uncle Valder?" She shook her head. "I don't want to cause any problems. He didn't do anything, he just makes me uncomfortable. As if he wanted something from me." The next day, Clara said she had received an urgent phone call and needed to come home early. My parents thought it was strange, but didn't question it much. Bernardo seemed irritated by her sudden departure, although he tried to hide it. That night, I heard noises coming from his room, rhythmic noises, as if he was hitting something repeatedly. The next day, I noticed that his knuckles were red and raw, as if he had punched a wall. The strange behavior only got worse after that. Bernardo started treating me with a mixture of disdain. When we were alone, he would sometimes get too close, invading my personal space. "Your cousin is a liar," he whispered once, cornering me in the hallway. "She made things up about me, didn't she say?" I felt fear for the first time. Not vague, distant fear, but real, physical terror. There was something in his eyes that was no longer human. It was like looking at a predator. "She didn't say anything." I managed to respond to the trembling voice. "He only had to come back because of his sick grandmother." He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, because if someone starts telling lies about me, neat, I'll be very sad. And when I'm sad, I do things that I later regret." It was a clear threat. I swallowed and nodded, trying to appear calm. When he finally pulled away, I ran to the bathroom and threw up, overcome with a dread I couldn't explain. I decided I needed to talk to my parents, no matter how crazy it sounded. I chose my father first. He was a police officer, trained to notice when something wasn't right. I waited for a moment when we were alone. One Sunday afternoon, my mother had gone to visit a sick friend and Bernardo was supposedly in the library studying for a test. "Father," I began, my voice shakier than I would have liked. "I need to tell you something about Bernardo." My father put down the newspaper he was reading and looked at me carefully. "What's wrong, daughter?" I told him everything I had seen in their room, the missing objects, the way he looked at my mother, the incident with Clara, the veiled threats. As he spoke, I saw my father's face change, first with surprise, then with concern, finally with something between disbelief and sadness. When I finished, we were silent for a long moment. My father sighed deeply. "Neat, are you sure you're not misinterpreting things? Bernardo had a very difficult life. It is natural that it has some strange behaviors. Sometimes I felt like I had been slapped. My own father didn't believe in me. Dad, it's not just strange behavior, there's something wrong with him, something serious. He looks at Mom in a way that gives me the creeps, and the way he spoke to me in the hallway, he threatened me." My father ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking older and more tired. "Daughter, Bernardo is still adapting. He was the one who suggested this idea in your head. It was my decision to adopt a boy. I know it's not easy for you to share our attention after so many years of being an only child." It was as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. My father thought I was making it all up out of jealousy, or worse, that Bernardo was right about me. "Do you think I'm lying?" I asked, my voice breaking. "No, daughter, that's not it. I just think maybe I'm seeing problems where there aren't any. We are all adjusting to this new family dynamic." At that moment, I heard the front door opening. Bernardo entered, carrying some books. When he saw us in the room, he stopped, looking from me to my father and back again. Something in my face or in my father's posture must have given away the topic of our conversation, because I saw something darken in his eyes. "Good afternoon, Mr. Valder." "Hi, Net," he said with that perfect smile that I now knew was completely fake. "Do I interrupt something?" "No, son. I was just talking to Neat about family things," my father replied, standing up. "How was the study?" "Productive," Bernardo replied, still staring at me. "I learned a lot of new things today." When my father left the room to get water, Bernardo approached me. His voice was barely a whisper, but every word was crystal clear. "I already warned you once, granddaughter. Don't test my patience. You won't like what happens when you really piss me off." I stepped back, feeling the blood run cold in my veins. It was no longer just intuition or paranoia. There was something deeply wrong with Bernardo, something dangerous. And no one but me seemed able to see. That night I locked my bedroom door for the first time, and in the days that followed I began to realize that something terrible was brewing in our home. Like storm clouds gathering on the horizon, heralding a disaster from which we could not escape. The worst was yet to come. And when it finally came, it destroyed everything I loved in ways neither of us could have imagined. Sometimes I wonder if there are moments in life that divide everything into before and after. For me it was November 17, 1966. A Thursday that started like any other. But it ended like the day that destroyed our family forever. The week had been tense. After my conversation with my father, Bernardo intensified his surveillance of me. I no longer pretended to be alone. The gentle smile and sad eyes gave way to a cold, calculating gaze that followed me around the house like a predator tracking its prey. Mom was more tired than usual that week. The school where I taught was having problems, with a lack of teachers, unruly children, and parent meetings that went on until late. She would come home exhausted, her shoulders slumped, those kind eyes now always red with fatigue. That Thursday, I woke up with a weight on my chest, a feeling that something bad was about to happen. They know that inexplicable anguish, as if the air were too heavy to breathe. I tried to convince Mom to stay home. I made up a story that I was feeling bad, that I needed her around. But there was an important meeting at school. "I promised to arrive early today, my love," she said, kissing my forehead. "Can we watch that movie you like so much after dinner?" I watched through the window as she walked away, a small, determined figure walking towards the bus stop. I didn't know it would be the last time I would be alive. The school released something earlier that day about a teachers' assembly. I arrived home around 2 p.m., expecting to find the house empty. Dad was at work, Mom was at school, and Bernardo was supposed to be in the workshop like every Thursday. But when I opened the door, I immediately felt that something was wrong. First, the silence. Not the normal silence of an empty house, but a heavy, oppressive silence, as if the air itself were holding its breath. Then the smell, light, metallic. At the time I didn't recognize it, but today I know. It was the smell of blood. Is anyone home? I called my small voice into the silence. No response. I left my backpack on the couch and walked slowly down the hallway. The door to my parents' room was ajar, a sliver of light escaping into the dark hallway. I pushed her away slowly, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst my ribs. What I saw in that room will haunt me until the day I close my eyes for the last time. My mother was in their bed. She was wearing the light blue dress she had loved so much, now stained dark red. His face, always so expressive, so full of life, was frozen in an expression of horror and surprise. Eyes open, glazed, staring at the ceiling without seeing. The throat. Oh my God! Her throat was deeply cut from ear to ear, as if someone had tried to decapitate her. And beside the bed, sitting in a chair, watching her with an almost dreamy expression, was Bernardo. His bloody hands rested in his lap. Beside her, on the floor, a kitchen knife, the same one Mom used to cut meat on Sundays. He didn't notice my presence immediately. He was lost in some kind of trance, looking at my mother's body as if admiring a work of art he himself had created. A sound escaped my throat. Not a scream, not a cry, but an animalistic, primitive noise of pure horror. That's what made Bernardo turn his head towards me. Oh, neat, he said, as if we were meeting for breakfast. You arrived early today. I couldn't answer. My eyes darted from my dead mother to Bernardo and back again, unable to process what they were seeing. She came back early too, he continued, casually pointing at the body. He said he wasn't feeling well. I wanted to rest a little before preparing dinner. A strange smile appeared on his face. I think now she will rest forever. I finally found my voice. What did you do? The words came out strangled, barely audible. Bernardo tilted his head to the side, like a curious dog. What do you think I did, granddaughter? I freed us all. Did you release it? I repeated, unable to understand. She was getting in the way. He explained it as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. It was between me and your father, between me and you. She was possessive, controlling, she didn't realize how she suffocated us all with that false love. It was like hearing someone speaking a foreign language. I could make out the words, but they didn't make sense together. You killed my mother, I said. And saying it out loud made it all terribly real. You killed my mother. The scream seemed to awaken something in Bernardo. The dreamy expression disappeared, replaced by that cold, predatory gaze I had only seen in glimpses before. And now I'm going to have to kill you too, he said, slowly getting up. It is a shame. I liked you, Net. We could have been a happy family, me, you and your father. But you never gave me a chance, did you? Always suspicious, always watching me, like a little spy. I took the knife. I don't remember moving it, or bending down to pick it up from the floor. In an instant she was paralyzed in the doorway. The next thing I knew, the knife was in my hand, heavy and slick with my mother's blood. Stay away from me, I warned you. The voice was firmer than expected. Don't come any closer. Bernardo laughed. A sickly, guttural laugh that didn't suit his young face. Or what, granddaughter, will kill me too. You have no courage. She was always her mother's darling, the protected little doll. He took a step forward. Stop! I shouted, raising the knife. Another step. I'm warning you, Bernardo. One more step. Now he was close enough for me to smell him. A mixture of sweat, blood, and something else. Something chemical that I didn't recognize at the time, but later discovered was cocaine. His eyes were dilated, feverish. You're just like your mother, he whispered. Weak, pathetic. You think you can stop me with a knife? I just slit her throat and didn't even blink. How do you think I'll feel when it's your turn? Something inside me broke. I don't know how to explain it. It was like a dam burst and all the anger, all the fear, all the horror of that moment flooded my body. I lunged with the knife, not out of self-defense or calculation, but out of pure animal instinct. The blade entered his belly with frightening ease. How to cut soft butter. Bernardo looked down, surprised, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. Then his eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in them. "You," then he started, but didn't finish the sentence. He staggered back, knocking the knife out of my hand as he fell to the ground. Blood began to spread rapidly across the steel, mixing with my mother's. I stood there paralyzed again, looking at my bloody hands, at my mother's body on the bed, at Bernardo writhing on the floor. I don't know how much time passed, seconds, minutes, hours, maybe. Time had lost all meaning. I only came back to reality when I heard the front door opening, my father's voice calling cheerfully. "I'm at home. I managed to leave early today." What happened next stuck in my memory as a series of disconnected flashes, images frozen in time. My father appeared at the bedroom door, the smile dying on his lips when he saw the scene. Bernardo, still alive, stretching out a trembling hand towards him. "Dad, she stabbed me. Help me," covered in blood, unable to explain, unable to do anything but point to my mother's body. "He killed her. Dad, he killed Mom," my dad, falling to his knees between us, his face contorted into a mask of indescribable pain. Bernardo, suddenly gaining strength, pulled a small pistol from under the mattress, my father's spare gun that he kept for emergencies. The deafening sound of the shot as my father, realizing Bernardo's intention, threw himself at him. The bullet that missed my father by inches and lodged in the wall. The desperate fight between the two. My father trying to snatch the gun from Bernardo's hands. Bernardo using his last strength to try to shoot again. And finally the moment when my father, a trained police officer, managed to turn the gun in Bernardo's direction. Another shot. Silence. Bernardo's body was finally still, his eyes open and fixed on the ceiling, just like my mother's. My father, breathing heavily, dropped the gun as if it burned his hands. The two of us, sitting on the floor of that room, turned into a slaughterhouse, unable to speak, unable to cry, unable to do anything other than look at the two bodies and the blood that seemed to be everywhere. That's how the police found us an hour later, when a neighbor, having heard the shots, finally plucked up the courage to call the police station. What followed was a blur of uniforms, questions, camera flashes, yellow tape cordoning off our home. I remember being wrapped in a blanket, despite the heat, because I couldn't stop shivering. I remember the look of pity on the faces of the police officers, my father's colleagues, when they took us to the police station. The next few weeks were a nightmare of testimonies, funerals, sensationalist newspaper headlines. Family tragedy, adopted teenager kills his mother and is killed by his police officer father. The investigation revealed things about Bernardo that none of us knew. He was not the innocent orphan my father believed he had rescued. His mother was not in jail for drug trafficking. She had been murdered 3 years earlier, with strong suspicions that her own son was guilty. Although they were never able to prove it. Bernardo had been through 5 foster families before us. All returned him to the system, alleging disturbing behavior ranging from animal torture to attempted sexual assaults on younger children. All of this was in the records that, for some reason, incompetence or corruption, never reached my father when he started the adoption process. They found a diary in his room detailing violent fantasies involving my mother and, even more disturbing, plans to kill my father and make it look like suicide. Then he convinced me to run away with him to another state. The investigation concluded that both my father and I had acted in self-defense. There were no formal charges, but the damage was done. Our family had been destroyed. Our home, once filled with love and security, was now stained with blood that no amount of cleaning could remove. We sold the house a few weeks later. None of us could even look at her without reliving that day. We moved to a small apartment on the other side of town, trying to start over, trying to find a way through the horror that had become our reality. But how do you start over when your whole world has fallen apart? How do you move on when the person you loved most was brutally ripped from your life? How do you trust again when your father's trust in someone resulted in such a disaster? That's the question that haunted me in the months and years that followed. A question I had no answer to, at least not yet. What I didn't know in that terrible moment as I looked at the blood on my hands, my mother's blood, Bernardo's blood, was that this was just the beginning of our ordeal, that the worst was yet to come. In the form of my father's crushing silence, in the weight of guilt that consumed him day after day, in the depression that gradually distanced him from me, the only family he had left. And I, a 15-year-old girl who had just seen her mother murdered and been forced to stab someone to survive, how could I know that I would need to find strength I never imagined I had to not only continue living, but to save my father from the abyss of despair he was sinking into? Life as we knew it had ended in that blood-stained room, and the path ahead was darker and lonelier than anything we could have imagined. Silence has a weight, you know? After that day, the silence in our new apartment was so heavy that sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night suffocating, as if it had become something physical, pressing on my chest until I couldn't breathe. The first few weeks after Mom's burial were pure torpor. It was as if we were moving underwater, slow, disoriented, unable to hear or feel fully. Dad took a leave of absence from work and I was out of school for almost a month. No one questioned. The story had been in all the local newspapers. The tragedy of the Santos family. The headlines were filled with photos of us taken from family albums that someone, some acquaintance, some neighbor had sold to the press. Our small apartment in the Agua Verde neighborhood, far from our old house, was supposed to be a new beginning. But how do you start over when your life has been torn apart so violently? In the early days, we barely spoke to each other, not out of anger or resentment, but because words seemed totally inadequate in the face of what we had experienced. At night, I would hear my father crying in the next room, a contained cry, muffled by the pillow, as if even in his pain he was trying not to disturb me. In the mornings, he would silently make our coffee, his eyes puffy and red, but always trying to smile when he saw me. A smile that never reached his eyes, which only highlighted the devastation on his face even more. "How are you today, daughter?" he would ask, the same question every morning, like a ritual. "I'm fine, Dad," I would reply, the same lie every day. We weren't well. We were broken, bleeding inside, unable to deal with the monstrosity of what had happened. It was in the third week in our new home that I realized that something beyond grief and mourning was consuming my father. He started losing weight rapidly, always claiming not to be hungry when I tried to get him to eat. I slept less and less. I would often find him in the early hours of the morning sitting on the small balcony of the apartment, staring into space. A glass of whiskey in hand. "You need to get some sleep, Dad," I said. "I can't close my eyes without seeing." He would start but never finish the sentence. There was no need. I also saw it when I closed my eyes. My mother in bed, the blood, Bernardo, the knife, the shot. A horror film that repeated itself over and over. One morning when I walked into the kitchen, I found my father sitting at the table, surrounded by papers. Police reports, adoption documents, photos of a younger Bernardo, old newspaper articles. He had his eyes fixed glazedly on the pages in front of him. "What is it, Dad?" I asked, even though I already knew. "I should have seen it, Ned," he replied. The hoarse voice of someone who hasn't spoken for hours. "It's all here, all the signs, his history, the alerts. How could I have been so blind?" I sat down next to him, looking at the scattered documents. There were reports from psychologists describing Bernardo as potentially dangerous, incapable of empathy, prone to manipulative behavior. There were records of occurrences in previous houses. A young child pushed down the stairs, a dog found dead, stolen property, small fires. "It wasn't your fault," I said, holding my father's cold hand. "You didn't know. No one showed you these documents." "I'm a cop, Ned," he said, pulling his hand back. "My job is to investigate, to discover the truth. And I didn't even investigate the boy I brought into my home, close to my family." A winkle. Guilt began to consume him like a disease. Day after day, I saw my father disappearing into himself. When he finally returned to work after 6 weeks of leave, he was a shadow of the man he had been. The other officers treated him with a mixture of pity and discomfort. He, who had always been respected for his integrity and competence, was now seen as a walking tragedy. I went back to school too, even though I had begged to change to another one. I couldn't stand the looks, the whispers when I passed by. Some friends tried to get closer, but I didn't know how to be normal anymore, how to talk about normal teenage things when I had seen and done things that no one my age should experience. Solange, my best friend, was the only one who persisted. He came to the apartment almost every day after class, even when I barely spoke. He would sit with me in silence, sometimes just holding my hand, other times telling me school gossip as if nothing had happened. His presence was like a thin thread connecting me to the world that existed before the tragedy. As the months passed, a grim routine settled in. Dad worked long hours, coming home late, often smelling of alcohol. I took care of the house as best I could, cooked the basics I had learned from Mom, tried to keep up my grades at school. We spoke less and less. It was a year after Mom's death that things hit rock bottom. I had just turned 16, a date that went almost unnoticed, with just a small cake bought by Solange and an awkward hug from my father. He looked worse every day, thinner, more distant, with dark circles under his eyes and a vacant expression that frightened me. That night, I came home from school and found the apartment dark and silent. I called out to him, but got no answer. A feeling of panic began to rise in my chest as I checked the empty rooms. When I got to the bathroom and the door was locked, panic turned to terror. "Dad!" I shouted, knocking on the door. "Dad, please answer." Silence. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and went back to pick the lock. When the door finally gave way, the scene before me froze my blood. My father in the bathtub, the water red, a deep cut on each wrist, his head lolling to the side, his eyes closed. For a terrible moment, I thought I had arrived too late. Then I noticed the subtle movement of his chest. He was breathing, albeit weakly. I don't remember exactly what I did next. I know I screamed for help, that I ran to the phone, that I called an ambulance. I know I tried to stop the bleeding with towels, that I repeated over and over again, "Don't leave me, Dad, please, don't leave me." The hours in the hospital were the longest of my life. Sitting alone in the waiting room, my clothes still stained with blood, my father's blood this time, I felt I had reached my limit. I was 16 years old and had already seen more death and suffering than many see in a lifetime. I had lost my mother, had taken away her life, even in self-defense, and now I was about to lose my father too. When the doctor finally showed up to tell me that he would survive, that we had made it in time, I burst into tears, not from relief but from total exhaustion. I cried until I had no more tears left, until my entire body ached, until the nurses worried that I would need sedation too. My father was hospitalized for 2 weeks, first in the ICU, then in the psychiatric ward. The doctors talked about severe depression, suicidal ideation, post-traumatic stress disorder. To me, these were just technical words to describe what I already knew. My father was drowning in guilt, and I didn't know how to save him. During those 2 weeks, I stayed at Solange's house. Her parents treated me with affection, trying to give me a glimpse of normalcy. Uncle Carlos, Solange's father and my father's childhood friend, came to visit me every day in the hospital, often staying when I couldn't because of school. When my father was finally discharged, he came with a bag of medicine and a recommendation for therapy twice a week. He was calmer, but still distant, as if a part of him had remained in that bathtub. "I'm sorry, Net." Those were his first words when we were alone in the house. "I wasn't thinking about you. I just wanted the pain to stop." I hugged him, feeling his bones beneath his skin, so fragile, so different from the strong man I knew. "We'll get through this, Dad," I said, not really believing it. "Together. Promise you won't leave me." He nodded, but couldn't look me in the eye. "I promise I'll try." The following months were a slow, painful recovery, with scary ups and downs. Therapy helped, not miraculously, but little by little. The psychiatrist adjusted the medication a few times until he found the combination that kept the darkest thoughts at bay. My father went back to work, but in administrative work, away from the streets and the pressure. We counted on unexpected help from people who until then had been only distant acquaintances. The lady in the apartment next door, Mrs. Irasima, a 70-year-old widow, started bringing home-cooked meals almost every day, insisting that we were too thin. The doorman of the building, Mr. Juvenal, always found a way to fix little things in the apartment without charging. The Portuguese teacher offered to give me extra lessons to make up for lost time. Small gestures of kindness that together formed a safety net around us, preventing us from falling into the abyss again. Still, we never went back to who we were before. Could we? We carried visible and invisible scars that completely reshaped who we were, how we saw the world, how we related to each other and to others. On my 17th birthday, my father made a visible effort to create some normalcy. He bought a cake, invited Solange and 2 other schoolmates who had grown close to me. He even played a song that Mom loved. In the middle of the small celebration, our eyes met and I saw in him a mix of sadness and determination that broke my heart. Later that night, when everyone had left, he handed me a small package. "It was from your mother," he said. "She wanted you to have it for your 18th birthday, but I think she would want you to have it now." Inside the little box was a gold necklace with a small pendant in the shape of an open book, a reference to the love of reading that Mom had tried to instill in me since I was little. She bought it months before everything happened. He continued, his voice breaking. I put it right where she had hidden it. Looking at that necklace, something broke inside me, not in a destructive way, but as if a dam had finally given way, releasing emotions I had kept bottled up for so long. I miss her so much, I confessed, tears flowing freely. Every day, Dad, every day I wake up thinking I'm going to hear her voice throughout the house. Me too, daughter, he replied, and for the first time since the tragedy, he cried openly in front of me, not hidden in the room, not silently, but great sobs that shook his entire body. Not a second goes by that I don't think about her, that I don't regret it. It wasn't your fault, I said with all the conviction I could muster. Father, look at me. It wasn't your fault. You just wanted to help someone, you just wanted to do good, but I brought the monster into our house, Net. I insisted even when your mother had doubts, and he deceived us. He fooled everyone. Even the experts didn't see what he really was. We stood there hugging each other, crying together for the first time. It was painful, but somehow also cleansing, as if together we could finally begin to drain the poison of guilt and resentment that was eating us up inside. That night didn't magically cure everything. My dad still had bad days, still struggled with depression, still woke up screaming from nightmares. I still had terrible flashbacks, I still avoided certain places and situations, I still jumped at any sudden noise. But something fundamental had changed. We were no longer suffering separately, each isolated in our pain. We were suffering together, and somehow that made the burden more bearable. Over the next few months, we established new family rituals, small moments of connection that kept us going. On Sundays, we made pancakes together, just like Mom used to make. On Friday nights, we would watch a movie, always something light, nothing violent or suspenseful. On Saturdays, we visited the cemetery, taking fresh flowers for Mom. And little by little, so slowly that I barely noticed when it started, we were relearning how to live, not like before, it would never be like before, but in a new way, carrying our scars with more dignity, enjoying the good moments when they came. Facing bad times together. In my senior year of high school, when it came time to decide what I would do with my life, the answer came naturally, psychology. I wanted to understand what had happened to our family. I wanted to help other people who were going through trauma. I wanted to turn all that pain into something positive. When I told my father, I saw a sparkle in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time, a glimpse of the man he had once been, the idealistic police officer who believed in making a difference. Your mother would be so proud of you, he said, taking my hands in his. And I am, neat, so proud that I can barely contain it. They were simple words, but they meant the world to me. A sign that, despite everything, there was still hope for us, that we could not only survive the tragedy, but eventually find a way beyond it. The road would be long, winding, with many obstacles still to come. But in that moment, for the first time since the day that changed everything, I felt that maybe, just maybe, we could find some kind of peace. What I didn't know was that this peace would come in unexpected ways and that the journey of healing would be as transformative as it was painful. That we would have to descend even deeper into the pit of grief before we finally found the light. Time is strange when you go through a tragedy. Sometimes it feels like it all happened yesterday. I can smell the blood, hear the screams, see my mother's empty eyes. Other times it feels like it happened in another life to another person. Today, at 73 years old, looking back, I see that 14-year-old girl, who lost everything in one day, could never have imagined the life that I would end up building from the ashes. I entered the Faculty of Psychology at the Federal University of Parana in 1970, at the age of 19. It was an achievement, not only for me, but for both of us, me and my father. He had gone back to work full-time, still in the administrative part of the police, and I gave some private lessons to help with the expenses. It wasn't easy, but we were moving forward, one day at a time. The university campus was a world apart from what I knew. For the first time since the tragedy, I was in a place where I wasn't the girl from that family, where people didn't know my story before they even met me. It was liberating and scary at the same time. I could be whoever I wanted, but I also felt like an imposter, as if I was carrying a terrible secret that, if discovered, would make everyone stay away. In my second year of college, something happened that would change my life again, but this time for the better. At a seminar on trauma, the professor invited a psychiatrist to talk about his experience treating survivors of extreme situations. Dr. Eduardo Mendez was about 40. He was 18 years old, with premature gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He spoke with such knowledge and empathy that I stayed after class to ask questions. "Do you have a particular interest in the subject?" He looked up after my third question. I hesitated. It was the first time I had considered sharing my story with anyone at the school. "Yeah, guys," I finally said. He nodded without pressing. "If you ever want to talk, I work at the university clinic on Tuesdays and Thursdays." It took me 3 weeks to work up the courage, but I finally went. Sitting in that small room with the pale blue walls, I told him everything about Bernardo, about my mother, about my father's suicide attempt, about how I still woke up screaming many nights. I talked for almost 2 hours without stopping, the words pouring out like a broken dam. Dr. Eduardo listened without judgment, without that expression of horror or pity that I so feared. When I finished, he offered no miracle solutions or comforting phrases. "Jane," he said, and it was the first time anyone had called me by my full name in years. "What you have experienced is unimaginable for most people. That you are here studying, working is extraordinary. But true healing doesn't come from just surviving, it comes from integrating the trauma, your story, without letting it define who you are." Those words opened something inside me. We started formal therapy once a week. It wasn't easy. I often left sessions exhausted, drained, as if I had run an emotional marathon. But slowly I began to see my story from another perspective. "You're not just a victim, Janet. Dr. Eduardo once told me, you are a survivor and more than that, you saved your father. Without you, he wouldn't be alive today." I had never thought of it that way. I always saw myself as the girl who didn't realize the danger in time, who couldn't protect her mother, who was forced to hurt someone to survive. The idea that there was also strength and courage in my actions was revolutionary. I shared these ideas with my father, who now had his own therapist. Little by little, our relationship was transformed. We were no longer just two survivors bonded by tragedy, but two people rebuilding a genuine connection, based not only on what we had lost, but on what we still had in each other. It was in therapy that I was finally able to talk about something I had kept inside for years, the guilt of having killed Bernardo. Even knowing it was self-defense, even knowing what he had done, that moment when I stuck the knife in him haunted me. "I took a life," I confessed, my hands shaking. "Sometimes I wake up and feel his weight falling on the knife. I feel the warm blood on my hands." In extreme situations, our brain only has a few options: run, freeze or fight. Dr. Eduardo explained. "You weren't thinking rationally at that moment, you were surviving. It wasn't a conscious choice, it was pure instinct." It took me a long time to accept this, to understand that my reaction didn't make me the same as Bernardo, that there was a chasm between killing for pleasure, for power, like he did to my mother, and killing to defend yourself when there was no other option. In my third year of college, I started to open up more. I made friends, joined study groups, even went to a few parties. Nothing fancy, but little moments of normality that had previously seemed impossible. One of those friends was Carlos, a law student, who I met at the library. We started talking about books and ended up talking about everything. On our fourth date, at a cafe near the university, he took my hand across the table. "Can I tell you a secret, Neat?" he said, using the nickname that few people used. "Now I know who you are." I knew from day one. My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "My father is lawyer. He'd worked on the case, your case, for 4 years. I recognized his name." I pulled my hand away, ready to get up and run. He continued quickly. "Wait, please. I haven't told anyone. I never would. I just wanted you to know that I admire you. The courage it must have taken to move on after everything." I froze, unsure of how to react. Part of me wanted to run away, to hide from the exposure. Another part felt a strange relief, as if a weight had been lifted by not having to pretend anymore, at least with one person. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice barely coming out. "Because I think I'm falling in love with you," he replied simply, and I wanted to start with complete honesty. It was the beginning of my first relationship. Slow, hesitant, full of setbacks on my part. Carlos had infinite patience, never pressuring me, always respecting my limits, even when he didn't fully understand them. It took me 6 months to let him kiss me. Almost a year to be able to stay alone in a closed room with him, without panicking. When I finally told my father about Carlos, he was visibly nervous. The idea of seeing myself involved with someone brought back the fears of what had happened with Bernardo. I invited Carlos to dinner and my father interrogated him, as only a police officer knows how to do. Carlos handled everything with respect and even humor, understanding where the concern came from. At the end of the night, when Carlos left, my father hugged me. "He seems like a nice guy, Ned," he said, his voice breaking. His mother would like him. It was the first time he mentioned my mother without that shadow of guilt and absolute pain. A small miracle. I graduated in 1974, at the age of 23. Carlos graduated in law the same year. Our relationship had grown stronger, surviving the pressures of college, my internal struggles, my father's fears. At the graduation, with the diploma in hand, I looked at the audience and saw my father standing up and applauding, tears in his eyes. Beside him was Solange, who had become a teacher, and a few other dear friends we had made over the years. It was at that moment that I realized something important. We had built a new life, not perfect, not without pain or scars, but a life with genuine connections, real achievements, moments of true joy. Carlos proposed to me that night, during the graduation party. I said yes, but on one condition, that we live near my father. He understood without me having to explain. My father had improved a lot, but he still needed us around and I couldn't be happy knowing he was alone. We were married in 1975, a small ceremony with just close friends and family. My father walked me down the aisle, thinner and with a lot more gray hair than he should have at 50, but with a genuine smile on his face. As he handed me to Carlos, he whispered, "Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become." We bought a house 10 minutes away from his. Carlos opened a small law firm specializing in human rights. I started working in a community clinic, serving people who couldn't afford private therapy. The work was challenging, often painful, but deeply rewarding. Using my own experience of trauma to help others navigate theirs made sense of everything that had happened. In 1977, at the age of 26, I discovered I was pregnant. The news brought a complex mix of emotions. Joy, yes, but also terror. How could I be a mother when I had lost mine so young? How would he protect this child in a world that had proven to be so brutal? Dr. Eduardo, now more of a friend than a therapist, helped me navigate these fears. "You are not condemned to repeat the past, Jane," he reminded me. "Your experience has given you wisdom that many parents will never have." My father was ecstatic with the news. Something in him grew younger at the prospect of being a grandfather. She painted the baby's room, set up the crib, and started buying toys months before the birth. "Will I know how to be a grandfather?" he asked me one night, his insecurity showing. "After all, are you going to be the best grandfather in the world?" I replied, holding his hand. "That child is going to be so lucky to have you." In September 1977, my daughter Marilyn was born, a name chosen in honor of my mother. Holding that little bundle in my arms was like feeling my heart outside my body, exposed and vulnerable, but also incredibly strong. The love I felt was so overwhelming that it left me breathless. The first year with Mari was exhausting, scary, and wonderful. Carlos proved to be a dedicated father, sharing all the responsibilities. My father would show up almost daily, bringing gifts, offering help, just wanting to hold his granddaughter for a few minutes. Mari grew up surrounded by love, protected but not suffocated. We decided early on that when she was old enough, we would tell her about what happened to our family. Not all the grim details, but the essentials, that his grandmother had been a victim of violence, that his grandfather and I had survived a great tragedy. We wanted her to understand her roots, but without carrying our traumas. In 1980, we had our second son, Valdir, in honor of my father. Seeing the two cousins together, my father with a grandson in each arm, was an image I never imagined possible in the darkest days after the tragedy. Life went on. We had joys. Children's first words, birthdays, graduations. We had sadness too. My father's death in 1995, from a heart attack at age 70. But even in losses, there was a fundamental difference. We were no longer alone, torn apart by tragedy. We had built a family, a support network, a full life. Despite everything. Mari graduated in medicine, Valdir in engineering. They both got married and gave me wonderful grandchildren. Carlos and I celebrated 50 years of marriage last year. Half a century of partnership, respect, and a love that grew from the ashes of the greatest tragedy anyone can imagine. Today, at 73 years old, sitting in this room talking to you, I look back and see that my life was not defined by what I lost, but by what I built afterwards. I'm not just the girl who survived the horror. I am a woman who found strength where she thought there was none, who learned to love when she thought her heart was permanently broken. If there is one lesson I can share from my journey, it is this: trauma does not have the power to determine who you will be forever. Yes, it leaves scars. Yes, it changes you fundamentally, but it does not determine the value of your life, nor does it limit your ability to find joy, purpose, and love again. My story is not about the tragedy, it's about what came after. The reconstruction, the healing, the discovery that we are much more resilient than we imagine. It's about how even in the darkest nights there is the possibility of dawn. If you are going through your own valley of shadows right now, I want you to know, you are not alone. There is a way through pain, even when it seems impossible to see. One step at a time, one day at a time. And maybe years later you'll look back, like I'm doing now, and see that you built something beautiful from the ruins. My dears, if this story touched your heart, it would make me very happy if you left a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. This place here has become my little corner to share not only my experiences, but also to connect with people like you. And look, if you want to receive more stories like this directly on your cell phone, join the channel's WhatsApp group. The link is in the description below. Every day, we send real stories from other grandmothers like me, who have gone through their own trials and found the strength to move forward. Remember, our scars tell stories of survival, not just pain. And sharing them can be the first step in healing someone who is suffering in silence. Until the next video, my dears. May God bless each of you.